I would love to introduce to all of you our special guest speaker today in our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion speaker series. This is Dr. Vandana Singh. She is a professor at the School of Information Sciences and Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the College of Communication and Information at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Her research focuses on the use of technology in various settings and includes gender and information technology, open source software, diversity, equity, and inclusion, online learning, rural libraries and technologies, and STEM education. She is here to talk to us about diversity and open source software. And with that, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm really excited to be presenting some of my work with you. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to also open the chat box so that I can follow along as people are just chiming in. So welcome and thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest in the topic. And thank you for being here. Thank you, USRSE, for inviting me for this. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you all more, getting to discuss the things that I really care about, and I know you all care about as well. So I'm looking forward to discussing that with you all. Before I start, I would just like to set my intention for the talk. I am presenting today thinking that this will lead to future collaborations, that this will lead to future opportunities of working together, doing some research about diversity, about open source software, and learning from each other. So that's the intent for presenting here today. And with that, I would like to go over the agenda for today, how I would like to use the time we have together. So I'm going to be starting a little bit with my introduction, and then I will share the diversity, equity, and inclusion research that I do. I will share with you some of the DEI concepts, and I'm sure all of you are very familiar with some of those concepts and use them. But just to make sure that we're all on the same page when we are talking about certain things, we'll start with concepts. And then I'll share with you some of my specific research projects, some of the research projects that I've done about women in open source software, about marginalized populations in open source software. And then I'll also share one project in particular that I'm working on, which is about teaching for equity in tech. So the course that I'm teaching currently, which is about educating better citizens for the tech industry for future. So I'll share that as well. And then I'll call upon you. I'll call upon you to make a commitment to change. How can we make changes? How can we make things better for everyone? How can we make it more equitable for everyone? So I will call upon you. With that, my name is Vandana Singh. As Miranda already said, I'm a professor in School of Information Sciences, actually a very, very new professor. I was just promoted to full professor this fall. So this is my first fall as full professor. I'm also the inaugural director for diversity, equity, and inclusion at the College of Communication and Information at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I've been doing research in open source software for over 2 decades now. I'm very interested in gender and IT, very interested in women in technology and their experiences. And so my service work also reflects that. I am currently involved with ACMW North America. I am in the executive committee for that organization. And I'm also the student chapter committee chair for that. And North America in that context includes a lot of different countries around us. So it's a big group of people on which we can have impact. I'm also involved with NCVIT. I'm part of their academic alliance. So I'm the programming chair for their academic alliance committee. So we, plan things for the academic members of NCVIT. And then I will share with you some of the DEI research projects that I have worked on. And like I said, we'll start with getting kind of the foundations correct. So we'll start with definitions. When we say diversity, equity, and inclusion, what do we mean by those things? And again, I know that you all know this. I'm just starting this so that we have a base level of, where we all are in terms of understanding this. So diversity essentially is about differences. So, there's been, this word has become so loaded. It is so political, especially where I live in Tennessee. You say diversity and people have all kinds of reactions to it. But essentially, this word is about differences. It's about differences between people. It is essentially just that acknowledgement that we are not all same, we are not homogeneous, that there are differences in people, and the differences can be individual, and then the differences can be group or social differences. So individual differences would be things like life experiences or learning styles or working styles or personality types, whereas group and social differences is what we often hear more about when we are talking about diversity, or when diversity brings frown to people's faces. It's because they're thinking we're going to talk about race, that can make people uncomfortable, or we're going to talk about socioeconomic status. It could be about class, it could be about gender, sexual orientation, country of origin, ability, intellectual traditions and perspectives, and also cultural, political, religious beliefs, and other affiliations. So diversity in itself is really this, it's just an acknowledgement of differences. We say, yes, we as people are different from each other. There are things that are common about it, and there are things that are different about it. And that's, what the word is about. Then if we look at the term inclusion, what does inclusion mean? So in step one, if we say there is diversity, if we acknowledge the fact, if we move from I am colorblind, I don't see differences of race among people, when we can move forward from there, then we can acknowledge that there are differences, and then we can be intentional. We can be intentional about accommodating those differences. So we can say, inclusion is this intentional and ongoing engagement or commitment with that diversity, that we just understood that we are different and there are things that are different about us and our experiences. So let's be intentional in making sure that we're going to engage with those differences. So that's where the word inclusion fits in. Now let's talk about equality and equity. So equality and equity are two words that are often misunderstood. Equality is something that has been seen as the right thing to do. So equality is about dividing resources in equal amounts to everybody. So we treat everybody the same. We divide resources, we allocate resources among people exactly the same. When we tried equality, when we tried doing that, we realized that it didn't work as well. And so there comes the concept of equity. When we are talking about equity, we are talking about dividing resources proportionally to achieve a fair outcome for all involved. So everyone who is involved in the process, do they have a fair chance of success? Do they have a similar chance of success? And for that, resource allocation needs to be adjusted. If that sounds a little confusing, then here's an example of why equal division of resources might not give you the best results. So if you look at this picture, in this picture, the first section shows equality, right? So it shows you three people trying to look at the game from the fence, and the little baby in purple shirt has absolutely no chance of seeing anything when the baby is also given the same resource as everybody else is. Versus equity is giving more resources to the person who needs them more. So based on their chances of success, in this case, the success is being able to watch that match or game beyond the fences. So that is what equity looks like. Equity looks like this division of resources according to what will give each individual a chance, a fair chance to succeed. So there's this quote from University of Michigan Diversity Institute, which I really like, which is, diversity is where everyone is invited to the party. Equity means that everyone gets to contribute to the playlist, and inclusion means that everyone has the opportunity to dance. So we acknowledge differences, we provide resources as needed, and then we make a commitment to include everybody. And that is what the differences between the term diversity, equity, and inclusion are. And whenever you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you get, responses of, is it fair? Or is it going against meritocracy? Are we in some way saying merit doesn't matter? So again, going back to that concept of equity of dividing resources, we have to think fair for whom? We have to ask the question when we are saying fair, what context are we saying that in? Fair for whom? So for example, in this picture, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. We can see obviously the little fish won't be able to do that, or the elephant. The monkey will of course pass in this exam very quickly. So here's this a quick example. So what are these, what are the objectives with these terms? What are the objectives with diversity, equity, and inclusion? So there's this more addition to this concept of equality and equity, which is to see where we are currently, and then to think about what justice would look like. So reality is, the reality of situation about division of resources is that one gets more than is needed. So they don't even need that much, but they keep getting the support. While the other gets less than that is needed. So you will see in this picture, the little purple baby is even further down into the ground, whereas the first person is, multiple stacks of boxes to support them. So that is because there is a barrier, and we're talking about removing that barrier. The progression that we want, we talked about equality, how that doesn't work. So equity works, but really equity is also not the goal. The goal of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts is justice, social justice, right? And what does justice look like? Justice looks like the last image here, where all three can see the game without supports or accommodations because the cause of the inequity is removed. So the barriers that are there, that are removed, so that everybody can get a chance to do it. So this is the goal. The goal for DEI, the goal for diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives is to really go beyond this division of resources to where we don't need to give anybody resources because we have removed the barriers that in the first place stop people from doing things. So that's kind of just, setting the stage for what are some of the basic concepts or the approach that I take in my work, the frameworks that I use in my research to understand what is going on in communities in open source software and women, with respect to women. So with that, so we've seen diversity and what equity, equality, and justice look like. But I would like to ask you all, why do you think diversity is important? So let's come up with some ideas here. I will share a Jamboard link with you all, and then I would like to pull that up here and have you all participate with me. So I'm going to post this in the chat. So if you click on that link, it will take you to the Jamboard. Can you all see the Jamboard that I have open? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So what you can do here is you can click on the post-its, and then you can type in here your reason, right? And then you save it, and then it automatically gets here. So innovation, more diversity is equal to more diverse ideas and better answers. Perfect. More creativity. Yes. Different perspectives. Absolutely. More fun. Yes. Yes. More brains available to address a problem. Yes. With enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. More fun. Retention. Okay. Because you avoid groupthink. Absolutely. Yes. So definitely the innovation goes with that, more diverse team research has shown that more diverse team lead to innovation and they break or disrupt groupthink. Okay. More brains available to address the problem, less chance of harm to outsiders. So what would outsiders mean in that context? Better fit with customer needs, because if your customers are diverse, then having that diverse voice represented is good, right? More diverse viewpoints, realistic representation of users. Exactly. Yes. Wonderful. Less likely to fall into unhealthy communication patterns. Yes, yes, because if someone else is there, then the toxic pattern gets disrupted. Better scientific solutions, not based on a single user base. Absolutely. Yes. Attention. Okay. Great. These are perfect. These are exactly all the reasons that it is important for. And thank you for participating. Thank you for filling this. In terms of user experience, making sure you can track how larger groups of users interact with your software. Yes, yes, absolutely. Very useful in user experience. That is awesome. Yes, I'm looking at some of these moving around and I think it's fun. I agree. This is fun. And thank you so much for indulging me. So that's perfect. That's great. So let's start back into our presentation and see some of the reasons why I have done this work, why I am interested in this research. So let's give me a sec here to kind of set myself back. And so that I can see the chat. There you go. I can see the chat now. And let me share screen and go back to our slides. All right. So you can all see the slides now, right?
Yes.
Perfect. So now I'll share with you some of the research projects. I'll talk about why I started them and then what are some of the projects, what are some of the things that I did, what are the results that I found, what are some of the key takeaways from different projects. So I have been doing research on open source software since my PhD dissertation. My PhD dissertation was about users of open source software and essentially looking at, how do people seek help for open source software when there is no 1-800 number that they can connect with. And as I progressed into doing my research and also kind of getting more comfortable in my research voice, I started thinking about, what is the representation of women in open source software? And these numbers that I came up with, which I found about open source software were really shocking for me. So overall in the workforce, women are more than 55% of the workforce in the United States. More than 20% in the tech force. So already in tech, we see a really huge drop, from the 57% or above 55% to between 20 to 25% is where we see women in tech industry. But when we go and look at open source software, we find numbers like 2% or 3%, or at the most 5%. There are different ways in which these are counted, of course, from different sources, but up to 5% is really the most that you see, which is quite shocking that there are so few women in open source software. And so that was a triggering point for me when I realized that this was the number. And then I started looking at older studies and the newer studies, and really for decades, this has been for 2 decades almost, it has been the same number. So what is going on? Why is there such an underrepresentation of women? Fine, there's not 55% in tech workforce, but there are about 20% or 25%. So why not in open source maybe 15 or 20%? And so with that, I started asking questions of why diversity in open source software should be studies, or why is it important? When you look at the numbers, of course, that looks pretty bad, right? Like 2 to 3%, there's something going on there that we need to understand. Why is this the number? But also, what we see is a lot of times the experiences that are being highlighted are quite negative. You hear about a lot of issues, and you hear about life experiences of women through blogs or through other channels, that it's not a very positive environment. So there's a lot of anecdotal and there is a lot of self-reported evidence of negative experiences in open source software. So that's definitely not good PR. There is also this aspect of US is growing overall globally. We are growing in number of programmers, technology people we need, and we are not having enough people who can take these jobs. And then we have this group of people, women, who are educated and stay in professional lives, but either they quit from IT jobs or they don't even join the IT industry. And so really the economic Since it doesn't make sense economically that we have this large number of group that is just for some reason not there. So we need to do something to improve that bottom line to make sure that we will have enough qualified people for all the IT jobs that we will have in the future. And of course, we've looked at diversity. We were talking about this in the Jamboard a little bit, that diversity is great for innovation. Supporting diversity is in favor of creating innovative software. And the big thing for me really is women are using the software, right? We are using the software. So if we had equal say in developing the software, in developing the products, they will obviously be more successful when you are kind of the laws that are being made. If women had a part in it, we would make better systems that are better for us because we understand our situation better. So those are some of the reasons for why it is important. But there's also this argument that maybe women don't want to do this. Maybe women are not interested in it. Are we going to push women to do this? So let's look at what do women lose? Why do they care? What do they lose if they're not participating in open source software? So let's look at the benefits and opportunities that are afforded to men who participate in open source software communities. They learn new skills. They learn skills of programming. They learn testing, UX, or they learn people, project management skills. They develop networks. They develop connections. They find job opportunities. They have this well-documented experience that they can put on their CV or resume. They have the knowledge. We all hear stories of someone develops a open source software, they get bought out by a company, they make a lot of money. So there's a lot of opportunities that are afforded by participating in open source software that women are not able to avail. For whatever reason, that number stays at 2 to 3%. So this is kind of the overall issues that we see. So the problem is the lack of diversity in overall tech industry. And here are some of the approaches that I take in my work to help with this, to fix this problem, or to move along forward in this problem. And the first thing is, if you remember, I talked about this presence of media or blog articles or anecdotal evidences, life stories of women saying, this is the negative thing that happens in open source. But we don't have a documentation overall in like peer-reviewed journal articles and such of what kind of environment is present there. So that is one of my big goals, is to do this research and then publish it so we have documented evidence of what is happening and what is going on. Because once we know and acknowledge, then we can move forward to try to fix it. And then I also work on developing system-based, policy-based, and community-based solutions to improve these situations. I also think a lot about, we are saying there is toxicity in the tech industry. What is the tech industry? It is our students who are tomorrow's workforce. So as an educator, I think about educating better citizens. What can we do in the university at the undergraduate level so that they are better skilled to be in diverse groups, diverse rooms, and behave appropriately? How do we develop allies, and how do we develop advocates for themselves? And how do we increase awareness about the problem of diversity in tech? Some of these issues that I will share, I think some of you will have the same experience, like I see you saying it, but I have not seen that. And so developing that awareness that things like that are happening around us, if we pay attention to it, if we are, if we don't have certain kinds of privilege, then we don't have these carefree experiences. So it's important to raise awareness for the people who don't see this. And also developing resources for diversity, equity, and inclusion in software engineering. So these are the approaches that I take in my work. These are some of the kind of summary of challenges that we see. We talk about pipeline. We talk about we're not educating enough women. We're talking about retention, right? We say women leave technology industry, majority, over 50% women leave tech industry once they join it. The attrition rate of women is twice the rate of men. So twice the number of women leave the tech industry, and 80% of them remain in professional working situations. So it's not that, they had children and then they stopped working. They choose to go in other professions. And some of the reasons for that are these barriers that they experience. Kind of going back to that image of social justice, the barriers that we saw there. What are some of these barriers? Glass ceiling, imposter syndrome, harassment, outright harassment, lack of support, lack of resources, misogyny, discrimination, toxic masculinity, othering, microaggressions, vexatious labor, invisibility, performative allies, and the list goes on and on. So there is a lot happening. Some of this is contributed from my research. Some of this is contributed from a lot of other different research projects, which explain how these things are happening. So let's look at some examples of my research projects now. This is one article early on that I wrote about open source software, women in open source software when I started doing the research. And it is called Motivated and Capable, but No Space for Error, Women's Experiences of Contributing to Open Source Software. And the methodology that I used here was survey and then interviews. So I surveyed women in open source software across different software development groups. And then I did follow-up interviews with them to ask similar questions and expand upon some of the questions. And I was asking, why they joined this, what is the benefit for them, what are their experiences, and what are the problems that they see. So the key takeaways from this particular project were that all women that I talked to, that I surveyed, are impacted by the underrepresentation of women and feel isolated. So many of them reported being the only one in the particular open source project or in a meeting or in a room, and sometimes feel isolated because of that. And sometimes feel like they have to speak for everyone, for every woman out there. So the point being, if there were more, then one person doesn't have to represent. It was very important what their first experience was like. So if in their first experience, they had a welcome person or somebody who helped them through through hackathons or some in-person programs, then they found these mentors and then they felt more comfortable in contributing. Another thing that came out is that, that they were very expressive about it, and also their own career track record showed that coding is not the only way in which you can contribute to open source software. So there are other things that women are doing, documentation, translation, user experience, different types of things that they're doing, and they all should be options available. One thing that I had not thought about before doing this research was codes of conduct. And in this study, the women reported that they would look at codes of conduct and they would see if there is an explicit mention of supporting this community supports newcomers or this community supports women, and then they would decide if they wanted to join it. So that was a very new thing that I identified. So I kind of, in the next study, took that thread and looked at it much deeper. They also, of course, talked about having to prove themselves and working extra to justify. So for example, one piece of interview was that a woman said that if a man is submitting a patch, he will say, here it goes, it works. And they submit the patch, versus when a woman submitted the same thing, she writes what all she tried, why this works, what is her qualification, what she has done before this. And then she, submits the patch or the piece of code that she is submitting. So in a way, every time having to justify, and that helps with the acceptance of it, that they belong, or that they can make this contribution. When I started looking at that, one of the things they talked about are these women-focused areas in websites, so women-focused forums. So I started looking at these women-focused or women-only spaces. They're not women-only, they're not exclusionary, but there are women-focused forums or spaces within the open source community. And the women that I talked to talked about these being good resource. So then I started looking at across open source software websites, how many actually had that kind of space. And so this study is about analyzing safe spaces or women-only spaces in open source software. And really the methodology was across, I think, 300 and so projects. We looked at if they had any such space or not. And if they did, what kind of activities were going on. So what we found out was that there was no standardized spaces or activities. So it's not a common thing that everyone is doing, but different things. The types of activities that women were doing in these spaces that were there were things like increasing the visibility of active women. So kind of showcasing success of women, giving role models, right? Connecting mentors to women, giving opportunities for collaboration, organization of events, educational opportunities, and spaces for social support. So these safe spaces were experienced as spaces for social support. So we started looking at more closely in the next study, more closely at how do women experience these spaces as safe spaces? And so for that, I did, again, forums content analysis. I looked at 5 different forums, 10,698 messages from 1,344 participants, most of them women, almost all of them women, very, very small percentage of men. And the key takeaways from this safe spaces study was that in these spaces, women receive and provide different types of support. They provide social support, they provide emotional support, they provide informational support and technical support. So if there's someone having a technical problem, then women help each other there. Informational support in terms of where to learn something, where to do something. Emotional support is something that I got very interested in because it was about reports of harassment and discrimination and how other women would help them understand the context or how to deal with it, or please don't quit because of this nonsense that you're dealing with, those type of things. And then social support of creating events, creating in-person events, creating networks and mentors and that kind of thing. So women were helping each other to succeed in the hostile OSS environment by sharing their experiences, by sharing their expertise and opportunities. So in that way, these women-only spaces or women-focused spaces foster gender diversity because they allow for these places to exist. And the concept of safe spaces, for those of you who are familiar with the feminist literature, this is a term from like 60s and 70s, which was referred to a physical space where a woman could go and be safe. But of course now so much of our life in different settings is online. So we're looking at these online forums or online discussion spaces as safe spaces to discuss things. So from the earlier study, I was talking about this thread of codes of conduct, right? That codes of conduct are very important, at least to the set of women that I interviewed for the first study. So I started again looking very closely at how many projects actually have codes of conduct. And then what do they do? What is the job of these codes of conduct? How are they being either implemented or not? And so again, I did forums content analysis to find codes of conducts across a large number of open source projects. And what we found is that there's no standardized code of conduct. Really, the variety in codes of conduct was quite astonishing because some of them were really this leftover from when it was mailing lists and talking about those type of things. But then also there was a wide variety in how codes of conducts were explained. So the findings were, so I looked at codes of conduct that existed, did content analysis on them, and then I looked at forums. The about 10,000 messages, that 11,000 messages that I had, and looked at which of these messages were about codes of conduct. What were women talking about when they were talking about codes of conduct? How were they using codes of conduct? What was the value according to, as reported by women in these forums about these? CZI EOSS program. I am not, Daniel, I'm not aware of the program. I am aware of the CHAOSS program, the CHAOSS program, which is about kind of similar idea, but no, I'm not. So I'll look into it. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel said if I was aware of CZI EOSS program, which focuses on codes of conduct. and requires all funding. So we are seeing more and more. I'm really happy to see this. There are more and more conferences, in-person events that are serious about their codes of conduct and really put them up front and center. So that's great. So some of the takeaways from this was that codes of conducts are important. If you customize, so there are templates out there that exist, which are a good start. If you don't have expertise or time to, customize it, then at least use the template. But customize are more important because then you can specifically say what your community will support. Declare your support for minorities. One of the things we did is went through it and saw who mentioned which minorities. And so definitely separate it from harassment procedures. There were some which would talk about what to do and some which would talk about what not to do. So, there is a decision that needs to be made at that place too. But of course, the most important thing is the enforcement of these codes of conduct, right? Are they being enforced? And so there should be enforcement and there should be visibility of that enforcement, that in this community, we have done this with the codes of conduct. This is what happened because of the result of this. Publish your diversity reports, say there were X number of complaints and, decision was made on, Y number of complaints or something like that. And very importantly, include women in governance. There were examples of, women talking about, this was the most fun analysis for me, where I saw women talking about, I did like across 10 years, I analyzed all the messages. So they're talking about early on about, I want to complain, but someone in the council, governance council, community council is the person who is friends with the person who was harassing me. So I don't want to complain. So then they started discussing, well, what we need to do is get one of us elected into the community council. And then eventually they did. And so when there is representation of women in the community council, then they're more comfortable in bringing up the issues that they were facing. And also other people start, supporting them as well. So it's very important to include women in governance. Now, this is the one of the studies that was kind of the most taxing, but also the one that was very difficult to publish for me. Eventually, I was able to publish it in the gender equality workshop at ICSI. So it's published now, but it went through many iterations because it was very difficult, I think a bitter pill to swallow, because I took all the messages that were about discrimination and hostility and misogyny and analyzed them and developed kind of metrics of what types of messages they are, what kind of reported impact are they having on the women. So the key takeaways really from this were harassment is common. It ranges from microaggressions to really extreme of rape and death threats. So these are things that are happening in OSS developer communities, women who are contributing their time and energy and skills to a project are being treated with this. Women report persistent and normalized experiences of sexism and misogyny. This is how it is. Boys will be boys, very normalized because it happens so often. And the impact on their well-being is real and damaging. It shows individual harm. The person who is suffering from it says, I'm going to quit, I won't work in this, but then also everybody who is reading the message, it is impacting them as well. I've seen so many stories of this community. Should I even be joining this? And women do end up quitting because of this type of treatment. So it is a serious loss to the community. Some more details from this study about the nature of sexism and discrimination that the women experienced. So like I said, persistent and normalized experiences. And, I was finding these posts which were literally me too, me too. And so this data was from, 2006 or 7 or 8. So way before the Me Too movement became popular, exact same words being used to express that, they had gone through them too. Yes, thank you, Daniel, for sharing that. And because they were so common that they became persistent and normalized. So we have to disrupt that cycle, right? Harassment in form of unsolicited communication, often sexual in nature, threats of rape and death, retaliation for complaining. If somebody complains, then again, they're, more people get against them. Even harassment from mentors. Very common not being heard. Again, quite, not contradictory to women's experiences in boardrooms or executive meetings. They say something, it's not heard, they have to say it repeatedly. OSS documentation in itself, the product documentation is and representation is sexist. So they are using images that are derogatory or condescending. Sometimes I also saw that these safe spaces were also, of course, there were men who were allies who were there to support and discuss and brainstorm ideas, but then there would be disruptors who join even these safe spaces and create issues there or harass. Benevolent sexism was very common. So some things like you can meet and support each other and be in this social space as long as your agenda aligns with what our vision for the project is. If you start diverging from that, then there's a problem. So we'll allow you to do this because it's your little space, kind of observation. So across these different projects that I have just shared with you, what are some of the common things that I have seen? I've seen lack of awareness among people of what is going on in the communities, lack of allies, not enough people standing up to support, lack of positive storytelling. So that idea of showcasing role models, showcasing success stories of women or marginalized people is very important. And of course, enforcement of codes of conduct, just having them is not, doesn't make much of a difference if you are not enforcing it. So what does the lack of awareness look like? It is about the status of diversity in open source software. So I don't know how many of you were shocked by the numbers that I was sharing, but usually that comes off as a shock to people because they don't think it is that low of a number. About the value of diversity, like why should we have everyone? Why should there be diversity? The Jamboard thing that we did. What is the measurable impact on the overall value of a brand or product? Also about the level of hostility and discrimination and harassment faced by minorities. More often, mostly when I present these at conferences, I will have someone walk up to me at the end and say, I see what you're saying, but I don't see it happening around me. And I use that opportunity to say, well, you're lucky that you don't, because if you were at the suffering end, you would. And I would encourage now you to keep your eyes open and be sensitized to what is happening to other people. Are people becoming invisible? Are people not, suffering microaggressions in your presence? Because these things are happening. We just have to be sensitized to them. Also the impact, that is a very difficult to measure thing. Like this harassment happens, we know the numbers, but we can't really say there is a causation, like a direct, causation of this, because this happened, this happened. That's why women are quitting. So this measuring this impact of hostility on the well-being, how, do they want to stay or not? But if they stay, what kind of, issues that might create for careers and such. For terms of lack of allies, it's important to start thinking about, for all of us to start thinking about ourselves as ally, for thinking about being an ally as a journey. So understanding your privilege, getting curious, starting with something very simple, be okay with making mistakes, keep learning. Keep improving, keep learning. So Better Allies is a very, very useful organization that produces a lot of content that I really like. So you can, check them out on Twitter and their website. What are some of the things that allies can do? What are some of the things that you can do in the places that you work? What you can do for underrepresented people? You can speak their name when they're not around. You can endorse them publicly. You can invite them to high-profile meetings. You can share their career goals with decision makers, and you can recommend them for stretch assignments and speaking opportunities. Yes, thank you, Miranda. Miranda says Better Allies is also a book. Very good read, yes. Allies can also amplify stories. When we see examples of things not going very well, then we can share those examples. We can raise voice in advocacy, and we can talk about enforcement of COCs. So I think codes of conducts really have that value where if something is happening in a community and we have it in our codes of conduct that we are not going to tolerate this, then it's very easy for other people to point out and say, well, in this community, this is what we believe in. So if you can't follow these, you're welcome to leave. Um, Now, I would like to quickly share with you this example of of a project that was funded by Google and Dr. Jeffrey Carver. I don't know if Jeff is here right now or not, but he's in your steering committee. He and I, Jeff, you there?
It doesn't look like he is, but I'm pretty sure most of us definitely know him. Yay.
Okay, yes, yeah, I got an email from him earlier today and he said he will try to join, but so that's why I wanted to check. So this is a project that he and I wrote together. It is it got funded by Google, and really the idea here was we are seeing this toxicity. We are talking about this diversity problem in the tech industry. Where is this tech industry coming from? It is, our students. It's people who are in schools right now who will go make this industry. So how can we impact that? And so the approach here was to, and I'm teaching this course right now. I'm very excited about this course. I'm teaching a new course for undergraduates in information sciences and across campus. It is a undergraduate course. It is open to all majors who could potentially join technology workforce. I'm embedding my students into an open source software community to experience communities, matching them with mentors. I'm currently doing that. And then talking to them in class about these different topics. So we are covering each of these topics each week, and then we are developing interactive activities for them to engage with these topics. Oftentimes our students graduate without having to ever think about these topics or understand the impact these things can have. So in the class, it's a very good mix. I'm, looking at a lot of advocates and a lot of allies and a lot of people who will take this with them in their workplaces. And it's been very refreshing to see students say, I really want to learn this before I graduate and go do my work. So for each of these activities, like for, microaggressions or for AI ethics, I have developed activities in which way they create something, with their classmates and reflect. So really the main innovation in this project is about creating this reflective and collaborative learning in the classroom where they can, deal with these topics, which might be somewhat uncomfortable at some points. If any one of you is interested in helping me, the course is called DEI TIP, so Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Technology and Information Professionals. And so if any one of you is interested, please get in touch and we can talk about how you can work with the students to help us out. So with that, where does that lead us? What do we want to do? We know some of the problems, we are learning, we are trying to be allies, we are trying to do better. What are some of the action items that we can do? We can create and support this creation of safe spaces for women or for other marginalized populations. We can create and enforce customized codes of conduct, highlight the profiles of successful women, facilitate mentoring and networking opportunities. Mentoring was really key in the first experience of joining open source software for women. And engage women in open source software governance. So these are some of the action items for communities that they can implement. From my side, here are some of the things that I am committed to in this work. I'm committed to continuing my research so that I can keep publishing empirical evidence in high-stake journals to increase awareness and documentation of these type of issues, providing actionable results for open source communities. I will continue introducing my students, women, and everyone to open source software and supporting them in this endeavor, developing mentorship alliances with OSS communities, disseminating my research at diverse venues. So this is an example of that. In addition to the academic conferences where I presented at Linux Foundation, I presented at ThriveWise. So I present at a lot of professional Linux Foundations conferences where practitioners are able to, become aware of some of these topics. And then supporting future development and also conceptualizing better technical spaces, safe spaces for women of open source software. And with that, I would like to ask you, what is your intention about this? Will you disrupt the status quo? The things that you heard, did they disturb you? Did they make you think twice about what can we do? And on that, what will you commit? So we have a commitment board. A Jamboard that is just the next slide from where we were. If you don't have the link, I'll share the link again, so you can click on it. And then I would like to see what you all would commit to. Can you see the Jamboard here?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
What would you do to support? Continue educating yourself? Yes. I told you I'm going to put you on spot. A pledge to speak up for those who do not feel they have the privilege or safety to do this. That is incredible. That is exactly the type of support that you can provide. Annoying people who should be annoyed. Yes. Love the idea of women-focused spaces. Yes. So supporting, creating them. Learn more about better allies. Yes. Continue to work, go back and add a COC to existing. Thank you. That is excellent. Thank you so much. Elevate contributors to OSS projects from underrepresented groups. Yes, thank you. Continue to work with US RSC DEI working group. Ensure we develop a process for enforcement of ORCOC and the visibility of that enforcement. Yes, thank you. Thank you. That is wonderful. Share this research with others. Thank you. Provide a safe space for coworkers. Yes, that's very important. And especially when we start talking about this concept of safe spaces, then that allows us to do that. I commit to mentoring in a way that not only improves technical skills, but also improves psychosocial support. Yes, that is very important. That's where this idea for the project is from, right? Use my role as PI to add diversity to our OSS team. Yes. These are wonderful. Thank you so much. These are like real solid, actionable. I'm so thankful for all of you for making these commitments. Build a transparent mechanism for those who join our local chapter to report issues. Yeah, yes. Annoy people who should be annoyed. Yes. We're going to keep annoying these people. I pledge to speak up. This is wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we can go back to our slides, and there are my slides right here. And let me find my Zoom so I can share. So here we go. Can you see the screen now? Yes, okay. Thank you. So the big thing to remember about diversity, equity, and inclusion is do something, measure it, and if it's not working, change it, improve it. So it's an iterative problem. It's an iterative problem solving. It is not a big bang approach. You can't do it once and then you're done and everything is good. But it's consistent improvement and commitment that is needed to do these things. So please continue to do that. And with that, I'm at the end of my slides. Here is my website, my email, and my Twitter as well. And any questions that you all have, I would be very happy to questions, comments, or anything.
Thank you, Vandana. Nice virtual applause for you here. We do have a few minutes left, folks. If you have questions or comments, I encourage you to raise your hand, unmute yourself, put them in the chat, whatever you'd like. I actually have a question to kick us off. For all that I hang out in the DEI realm all the time, I've never heard of the term vexatious labor. What does that mean?
Yes, that is the, thank you for asking that question. I was trying to make sure that I don't spend too much time on the slides, so I kept doing it. So that is actually a term I coined for one of the one of the problems I was analyzing, and I kept seeing it again and again and again, that, women have to write this extra page. They have to justify everything that they're doing of why they're worthy of doing it. And there, another aspect, the flip side of that was, this was one thing, was to justify everything that we are doing with why I am capable of doing it, why this will work, and why it's not just, I am doing it, so it's great. The other part was this experience that a lot of women kept telling me from open source or technical communities, that, they will prepare presentations or they will make demonstrations. And when they are at a conference or at an event, they are asked to set up the table or, man the booth. And the men in their team were doing the presentations and essentially taking credit for the work that they had done. And so they were doing this work, but they were angry doing it. So vexatious is that sense of not being happy about this. But this is labor, this is work, even that justification that, we are doing this extra work. So that's what vexatious labor is, that we're having to do this extra work and we're definitely not happy about doing it. We know we don't want to do it. So that's where the term came from.
Thank you. I will 100% be honest that I went and tried to Google it, couldn't find it.
Yeah, I wrote it in the article, so it's just there. I think we need to kind of amplify it. But does it make sense of what I call vexatious labor?
Oh yes, it makes sense, because it didn't, like vexatious litigation being people who are just putting things out there over and over for no real cause. And so that's what I thought maybe that would be what it was about, but glad to know that there's a verification there. So we do have a couple questions. We don't have very much time, so we'll go through them. Helen Kershaw says, can you talk a little bit about what you are looking for in mentors for the DEI TIP project?
Yes, 1 sec. So I'll just read the question from Reed. So question regarding codes of conduct: how should a community deal with a complaint response that many feel was handled unjustly? So we received a complaint and then people felt that it was not dealt with justly. Okay. Under a COC that the community now agrees is inadequate, we can't go back in time to fix the COC for the complaint that has already been handled. Yes. I think that is a very good point. And like, just slide that we have up here, we are talking about learning and improving. So in the past, what has happened, I think, a genuine apology to the person and the persons who felt like that it was not handled properly. If the people who were the offenders can present that apology, even better. But if they can't, at least the people responsible can acknowledge the fact that this was not handled properly, and we apologize for it. And on the basis of this, here is a change that has happened. Here is how we are changing our codes of conduct so that this doesn't happen again. I think would go a long way in, placating and satisfying the people who have problems, but also ensuring this doesn't happen again, right? Does that make sense, Reed? Yeah.
We are right at the top of the hour, so we are out of time. Would you mind putting up the slide again with your information, just so people can see it?
My contact information, yes. And the DEI project, essentially, this is about working 2 months from 15th of September to 15th of November with the students, and in inviting them into open source communities. They don't have to do big changes or big things, but just learning how to participate in a community. And then they will look at it from the diversity perspective. They will kind of analyze, and then 2 months later, they will. So first assignment is they do something and they contribute in some way. A lot of my students are user experience or data science type of students. So that's the type of projects they're interested in. And then at the end, they will take their own take on, in that particular community, what kind of diversity action plan would be useful. So they will create that. And so the mentors will work with them for 8 weeks. And there is a compensation, monetary compensation, not very high, we're just a university, but still there is some compensation for the time in the 8 weeks that the mentors will do. And I will be teaching this course again next fall, and we will do the same thing again as well. So anyone who would be willing to be a mentor to my students, please email me at this email address. And thank you so much for being here and for asking these questions.
Thank you, Vandana, and thank you everybody who was able to attend. This video was recorded as noted. I'm going to turn off the recording.